170 Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading a story, and that will be... I'm going to say it later, but... That will be The Princess Bride. But first up, we're going to be reading the Bible. Then we are going to be doing an appearance with my sister, Becca. Then we are going to be doing... Then we are going to be doing the synopsis with Kimberly. Then we are going to be doing The Princess Bride ratting time.
No, dog of the day.
Ratting time? What does that mean?
It means something better than reading.
Oh, okay.
Wait, who's next?
I'm going to read the... Hi. I'm going to read Esther. Thank you, one person, for showing up.
You're welcome.
Okay, so this is Esther chapter 8. This is the English Standard Version of the Bible. And on that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king, and she said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked." The king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. And an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews to the satraps and the governors and the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in his own script, and to each people in his own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letters by mounted couriers, riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods on one day throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. A copy of what was written was issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all peoples, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So the couriers, mounted on their swiftest horses that were used in the king's service, rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday, and many from the people of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. And that is the end of chapter 8. That's where we will hang it for the evening. That was not an intended hanging, since Haman was hanged. So here's Kimberly. I think she's got some artwork to show you from yesterday, or from 2 days ago actually, and we are going to
Do the synopsis?
do the synopsis. That's it. Mom says she's my biggest fan. That's why it's always so cold in here. All right. And Becca also has artwork to show us, and we will... Which one are we doing first? I think we're going to do Kimberly first, and then Becca will come and show her artwork. Here. All right.
Dad has too many pillows.
Thank you.
I drew this one. Becca, you should show yours now.
Okay. This is one I drew a while ago. So, hopefully I can take a screenshot of it and color it digitally. I want to see how that works out. So, off. Yeah. Yep.
Becca, do you draw while I'm reading sometimes?
So what happened in the synopsis, well, in the last chapter, sorry, my brain isn't working today.
Actually, it's the last half chapter.
Okay, what happened in the last half chapter was, well, Buttercup, she started having nightmares. And then what happened was, Wesley started getting tortured. And then we heard about what happened with, the Turk and the Spaniard. The Spaniard, he ran off over to, the place that they were supposed to meet each other. And he waited for everybody, but nobody came.
But at least he was happy because he really likes that place. He was just hanging out with his buddies. Right?
Dad, stop. Please.
Is that right though?
No.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
thought it
I
was.
remember that.
He hated that place. It was completely filled with all kinds of criminals. And he literally...
Scum of the earth.
He couldn't just walk around saying, "Greatest swordsman of all time, don't poke me."
That's how you pick a fight.
Because he
Yeah.
has been beaten.
No, he couldn't do that
that's
even
true,
before
because
he'd been...
he felt really self-conscious about it.
Yeah.
Because he's been beaten.
And even then, if he did it before then, he couldn't have done it anyway. But then what happened was, it was the Turk, right?
Yeah.
What happened was, he couldn't...
Fezzik?
Yeah, Fezzik. Fezzik couldn't remember, where he was supposed to go, even though, Inigo
Inigo?
Inigo made a rhyme for it.
Yeah. Inigo made a rhyme for it and he couldn't remember then. So, what happened then was he did get out of the area so he didn't get caught, and I think he, I forget where he went.
Does anyone know where
He went to the post office.
JJ says he went to the post office.
To see if anyone knew where the guy was.
First he went to go to Vicini.
No, he went to the
And Vicini was dead.
and he's like, oh, he's dead.
Oh, he's
Well, at least he won't be yelling at me anymore.
Wait, he went to the
And
place
for thieves, like where they.
No, that was
No, that was Inigo.
Oh, that was in the.
yeah. And he went over to see Vicini, and he's like, "Oh, he's dead." And then he ran off in a random direction, wondering what was going on.
And he was
Like,
trying to.
He finally reached a tiny village and found just outside of the town some nice
yeah.
rocks. Formed a cave.
and then he got
The
thrown.
village kids were making fun of him.
Yeah, they threw stones at him
Yeah.
And they were scared.
at first.
Poor guy.
All right.
He's got entirely too many pillows.
Actually, no. All right. So. Arrgh. Okay, so we've got quite a ways to go today, so I'm going to try to read as quick as possible.
I was already.
All right, are we going to sit down and get settled?
Where'd my pencil go?
Waiting. Do 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 do.
Stop.
Do 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 do.
Stop.
Oh, here's a pencil, Kimmy.
Oh, that's my pencil. Don't throw it.
All right, Expelliarmus. Expelliarmus. All right. All right. So this is on this side of it. The Buttercup wrote the letter to Wesley, and they sent it off in the four Festus ships because the prince is definitely a man of his word and very reliable and to be trusted. All right, so let's keep going. Prince Humperdinck simply had no time. There seemed to be not one decision in all of Florin that one way or another didn't eventually come heavily to rest upon his shoulders. Not only was he getting married, his country was having its 500th anniversary. Not only was he noodling around in his mind the best way to get a war going, he also had to constantly have affection shining from his eyes. Every detail had to be met, and met correctly. His father was just no help at all, refusing either to expire or stop mumbling. You thought his father was dead, but that was in the fake-out, don't forget. Morgenstern was just edging into nightmare sequence, so don't be confused. And start making sense. Queen Bella simply hovered around him, translating here and there, and it was with a shock that Prince Humperdinck realized, just 12 days before his wedding, that he had neglected to set in motion the crucial Gilder section of his plan. So he called Yellen to the castle late one night.
He's under the table.
I see. Why is he under the table?
I'm looking.
Have kids, they said.
It'll be fun, they said.
JJ, move.
Okay, let me see if I can find my place. He called Yellen to the castle late one night. Yellen was chief of all enforcement in Florin City, a job he had inherited from his father. The albino keeper at the zoo was Yellen's first cousin, and together they formed the only pair of non-nobles the prince could come close to trusting. Your Highness, Yellen said. He was small but crafty, with darting eyes and slippery hands. Prince Humperdinck came out from behind his desk. He moved close to Yellen and looked carefully around before saying softly, I have heard from unimpeachable sources that many men of Gilder have of late begun to infiltrate our thieves' quarter. They are disguised as Florinese, and I am worried. I have heard nothing of such a thing, Yellen said. A prince has spies everywhere. I understand, said Yellen. And you think, since the evidence points that they tried to kidnap your fiancée once, such a thing might happen again. It is a possibility. I'll close off the thieves' quarter then, Yellen said. No one will enter and no one will leave. Not good enough, said the prince. I want the thieves' quarter emptied and every villain jailed until I am safely on my honeymoon. Yellen did not nod quickly enough, so the prince said, State your problem. My men are not always too happy at the thought of entering the thieves' quarter. Many of the thieves resist change. Root them out. Form a brute squad. But get it done. It takes at least a week to get a decent brute squad going, Yellen said, but that is time enough. He bowed and started to leave, and that was when the scream began. Yellen had heard many things in his life, but nothing quite so eerie as this. He was a brave man, but this sound frightened him. It was not human. It was not human, but he could not guess the throat of the beast it came from. It was actually a wild dog on the first level of the zoo, but no wild dog had ever shrieked like that before. But then, no wild dog had ever been put in the machine. The sound grew in anguish, and it filled the night sky as it spread across the castle grounds, over the walls, even into the great square beyond. It would not stop. It simply hung now below the sky, an audible reminder of the existence of agony. In the great square, half a dozen children screamed back at the night, trying to blot out the sound. Some wept, some only ran for home. Then it began to lessen in volume. Now it was hard to hear in the great square. Now it was gone. Now it was hard to hear on the castle walls. Now it was gone from the castle walls. It shrunk across the grounds toward the first level of the Zoo of Death, where Count Rugen sat fiddling with some knobs. The wild dog died. Count Rugen rose, and it was all he could do to bury his own shriek of triumph. He left the zoo and ran toward Prince Humperdinck's chambers. Yellen was just going when the Count got there. The prince was seated now behind his desk. When Yellen was good and they were alone, the Count bowed to his majesty. The machine, he said at last, works. Prince Humperdinck took a while before answering. It was a ticklish situation, granted. He was the boss, the Count merely an underling. Still, no one in all Florin had Rugen's skills. As an inventor, he had obviously at last rid the machine of all defects. As an architect, he had been crucial in the safety factors involved in the Zoo of Death, and it had undeniably been Rugen who had arranged for the only survivable entrance being the underground fifth-level one. He was also supportive to the prince in all endeavors of hunting and battle, and you didn't give a follower like that a quick, get-out-of-the-way, boy, you bother me. So the prince indeed took a while. Look, Ty, he said finally, I'm just thrilled you smoothed all the bugs out of the machine. I never for a minute doubted you'd get it right eventually, and I'm really anxious as can be to see it working, but how can I put this? I can't keep my head above water 1 minute to the next. It's not just the parties and the goo-gooing with what's-her-name. I've got to decide how long the 500th anniversary parade is going to be, and where does it start, and where does it start, Okay. And which nobleman gets to march in front of which other nobleman so that everyone's still speaking to me at the end of it. Plus, I've got a wife to murder and a country to frame for it. Plus, I've got to get the war going once that's all happened. And all this is stuff I've got to do myself. Here's what it all comes down to. I'm just swamped, Ty. So, about if you go to work on Wesley and tell me how it goes, and when I get the time, I'll come watch, and I'm sure it'll just be wonderful. But for now, what I'd like to do is a little breathing. No hard feelings. Count Rugen smiled. None. And there weren't any. He always felt better when he could dole out pain alone. You could concentrate much more deeply when you were alone with agony. I knew you'd understand, Ty. There was a knock on the door, and Buttercup stuck her head in. Any news? She said. The prince smiled at her and sadly shook his head. Honey, I promised to tell you the second I hear a thing. It's only 12 days, though. Plenty of time, Dulcis, darling. Now don't worry yourself. I'll leave you, Buttercup said. I was going, too, the Count said. May I walk you to your quarters? Buttercup nodded, and down the corridor they wandered till they reached her suite. Good night, Buttercup said quickly. Ever since that day he had first come to her father's farm, she had always been afraid whenever the Count came near. I'm sure he'll come, the Count said. He was privy to all the prince's plans, and Buttercup was well aware of this. I don't know your fellow well, but he impressed me greatly. Any man who can find his way through the fire swamp can find his way to Florin Castle before your wedding day. Buttercup nodded. He seemed so strong, so remarkably powerful, the Count went on, his voice warm and lulling. I only wondered if he possessed true sensitivity, as some men of great might, as you know, do not. For example, I wonder, is he capable of tears? Wesley would never cry, Buttercup answered, opening her chamber door, except for the death of a loved one. And with that she closed the Count away, and alone went to her bed and knelt. Wesley, she thought then, do come, please. I have begged you in my thoughts now these many weeks, and still no word. Back when we were on the farm, I thought I loved you, but that was not love. When I saw your face behind the mask on the ravine floor, I thought I loved you, but that was again nothing more than deep infatuation. Beloved, I think I love you now, and I pray you only give me the chance to spend my life in constant proving. I could spend my life in the fire swamp and sing from morn till night if you were by me. I could spend my eternity sinking down through snow sand if my hand held your hand. My preference would be to last eternity with you beside me on a cloud, but I would also be a lark if Wesley would be with me. She went on that way, silent hour after silent hour. She had done nothing else for 38 evenings now, and each time her ardor deepened, her thoughts became more pure. Wesley, Wesley, flying across the 7 seas to claim her. For his part, and quite without knowing, Wesley was spending his evenings in much the same fashion. After the torture was done, when the albino had finished tending his slashes or burns or breaks, when he was alone in the giant cage, he sent his brain to Buttercup, and there it dwelled. He understood her so well. In his mind he realized that moment he left her on the farm when she swore love. Certainly she meant it, but she was barely 18. What did she know of the depth of her heart? Then again, when he had removed his black mask and she had tumbled to him, surprise had been operating, stunned astonishment at as much as emotion. But just as he knew that sun was obliged to rise each morning in the east, no matter how much a western arisal might have pleased it, so he knew that Buttercup was obliged to spend her love on him. Gold was inviting, and so was royalty, but they could not match the fever in his heart, and sooner or later she would have to catch it. She had less choice than the sun. So, when the Count appeared with the machine, Wesley was not particularly perturbed. As a matter of fact, he had no idea what the Count was bringing with him into the giant cage. As a matter of absolute fact, the Count was bringing nothing. It was the albino who was doing the actual work, making trip after trip with the thing after thing. That was what it really looked like to Wesley. Things. Little soft-rimmed cups of various sizes, and a wheel, most likely, and another object that could turn out to be either a lever or a stick. It was hard to tell. A good evening to you, the Count began. He had never, to Wesley's memory, shown such excitement. Wesley made a very weak nod in return. Actually, he felt about as well as ever, but it didn't do to let that kind of news get around. Feeling a bit under the weather? The Count asked. Wesley made another feeble nod. The albino scurried in and out, bringing more things, wire-like extensions, stringy and endless. That will be all, the Count said finally. Nod. Gone. This is the machine, the Count said when they were alone. I've spent 11 years constructing it. As you can tell, I'm rather excited and proud. Wesley managed an affirmative blink. I'll be putting it together for a while, and with that he got busy, Wesley watching the conversation with a good deal of interest and, logically enough, curiosity. You heard that scream a little bit earlier this evening. Another affirmative blink. That was a wild dog. The machine caused the sound. It was a very complex job the Count was doing, but the 6 fingers on his right hand never for a moment seemed in doubt as to just what to do. "I'm very interested in pain," the Count said, "and I'm sure you've gathered these past months, and in an intellectual way, actually. I've written, of course, for the more learned journals on the subject, articles mostly. At the present, I'm engaged in writing a book. My book. The book, I hope. The definitive work on pain, at least as we know it now." Wesley found the whole thing fascinating. He made a little groan. Excuse me. "I think pain is the most underrated emotion available to us," the Count said. "The serpent, to my interpretation, was pain. Pain has been with us always, and it always irritates me when people say, as important as life and death, because the proper phrase, to my mind, should be, as important as pain and death." The Count fell silent for a time. Then, as he began and completed a series of complex adjustments. "One of my theories," he said somewhat later, "is that pain involves anticipation. Nothing original, I admit, but I'm going to demonstrate to you what I mean. I will not, underline not, use the machine on you this evening. I could. It's ready and tested, but instead I will simply erect it and leave it beside you, for you to stare at the next 24 hours, wondering just what it is and how it works, and can it really be as dreadful as all that?" He tightened some things here, loosened some more over there, tugged and patted and shaped. The machine looked so silly, Wesley was tempted to giggle. Instead, he groaned again. "I'll leave you to your imagination, then," the Count said, and he looked at Wesley. "But I want you to know one thing before tomorrow night happens to you, and I mean it. You are the strongest, the most brilliant and brave, the most altogether worthy creature it has ever been my privilege to meet, and I feel almost sad that, for the purposes of my book and future pain scholars, I must destroy you." "Thank you," Wesley breathed softly. The Count went to the cage door and said over his shoulder, "And you can stop all your performing about how weak and beaten you are. You haven't fooled me for a month. You're practically as strong now as on the day you entered the fire swamp. I know your secret, if it's any consolation to you." "Secret?" Hushed, strained. "You've been taking your brain away," the Count cried. "You haven't felt the least discomfort in all these months. You raise your eyes and drop your eyelids, and then you're off, probably with, I don't know, her, most likely. Good night now. Try and sleep. I doubt you'll be able to. Anticipation, remember." With a wave, he mounted the underground stairs. Wesley could feel the sudden pressure of his heart. Soon the albino came, knelt by Wesley's ear, whispered, "I've been watching you all these days. You deserve better than what's coming. I'm needed. No one else feels the beasts as I do. I'm safe, or feeds the beasts. I'm safe. They won't hurt me. I'll kill you if you like. That would foil them. I've got some good poison, I beg you. I've seen the machine. I was there when the wild dog screamed. Please, let me kill you. You'll thank me, I swear." "I must live," whispered. "But—" Interruption. "They will not reach me. I am all right. I am fine. I am alive, and I will stay that way." He said all the words aloud, and said them with passion. But for the first time in a long time, there was terror. "Well, could you sleep?" the Count asked the next night upon his arrival in the cage. "Quite honestly, no," Wesley replied in his normal voice. "I'm glad you are being honest with me. I'll be honest with you. No more charades between us," the Count said, patting down a number of notebooks and quill pens and ink bottles. "I must carefully track your reactions," he explained. "In the name of science?" The Count nodded. "If my experiments are valid, my name will last beyond my body. It's immortality I'm after, to be quite honest." He adjusted a few knobs on the machine. "I suppose you're naturally curious as to how this works." "I have spent the night pondering, and I know no more than when I started. It appears to be a great conglomeration of soft-rimmed cups of infinitely varied sizes, together with a wheel and a dial and a lever, and what it does is beyond me. Also glue," added the Count, pointing to a small tub of thick stuff, "to keep the cups attached. And with that he set to work, taking cup after cup, touching the soft rims with glue, and setting them against Wesley's skin. "Eventually I'll have to put one on your tongue, too," the Count said, "but I'll save that for last in case I have to ask you any questions." In case you have any questions. "This certainly isn't the easiest thing to get set up, is it?" "I'll be able to fix that in later models," the Count said. "At least those are my present plans." And he kept right on putting cup after cup on Wesley's skin until every inch of exposed surface was covered. "So much for the outside," the Count said. This next is a bit more delicate. Try not to move." "I'm chained hand, head, and foot," Wesley said. "How much movement do you think I'm capable of? Are you really as brave as you sound, or are you a little frightened? The truth, please. This is for posterity, remember." "I am a little frightened," Wesley replied. The Count jotted that down along with the time. Then he got down to the fine work, and soon there were tiny, soft-rimmed cups on the insides of Wesley's nostrils, against his eardrums, under his eyelids, above and below his tongue, and before the Count arose, Wesley was covered inside and out with the things. "Now all I do," the Count said very loudly, hoping Wesley could hear, "is get the wheel going to its fastest spin so that I have more than enough power to operate, and the dial can be set from 1 to 20, and this being the first time, I will set it at the lowest setting, which is 1. And then all I need to do is push the lever forward, and we should, if I haven't gummed it up, be in full operation." But Wesley, as the lever moved, took his brain away, and when the machine began, Wesley was stroking her autumn-colored hair and touching her skin of wintry cream, and then his world exploded because the cups were everywhere, and before they had punished his body, but left his brain, only not the machine. The machine reached everywhere. His eyes were not his to control, and his ears could not hear her gentle, loving whisper, and his brain slid away, slid far from love into the deep vault of despair, hit hard, fell again, down through the house of agony, into the county of pain. Inside and out, Wesley's world was ripping apart, and he could do nothing but crack along with it. The Count turned off the machine just then, and as he picked up his notebooks, he said, "As you no doubt know, the concept of the suction pump is centuries old. Well, basically, that's all this is, except instead of water, I'm sucking life. I've just sucked away 1 year of your life. Later, I'll set the dial higher, certainly to 2 or 3, perhaps even to 5. Theoretically, 5 should be 5 times more severe than what you've just endured. So please be specific in your answers. Tell me honestly, how do you feel?" "In humiliation and suffering and frustration and anger and anguish so great it was dizzying." Wesley cried like a baby. "Interesting," said the Count, and carefully noted it down. It took Yellen a week to get his enforcers together in sufficient number, together with an adequate brute squad, and so, 5 days before the wedding, he stood at the head of his company awaiting the speech of the prince. This was in the castle courtyard, and when the prince appeared, the Count was, as usual, with him. Although not as usual, the Count seemed preoccupied, which, of course, he was, though Yellen had no way of knowing that. The Count had sucked 10 years from Wesley this past week, and with the life of 65 that was average for a Florinese male, the victim had approximately 30 years remaining, assuming he was about 25 when they started experimenting. But how best to go about dividing that? The Count was simply in a quandary. So many possibilities, but which would prove scientifically most interesting? The Count sighed. Life was never easy. "You are here," the prince began, "because there may be another plot against my beloved. I charge each and every one of you with being her personal protector. I want the thieves' quarter empty and all the inhabitants jailed 24 hours before my wedding. Only then will I rest easy. Gentlemen, I beg of you, Think of this mission as being an affair of the heart, and I know you will not fail." With that he pivoted and, followed by the Count, hurried from the courtyard, leaving Yellen in command. The conquest of the thieves' quarter began immediately. Yellen worked long and hard at it each day, but the thieves' quarter was a mile square, so there was much to do. Most of the criminals had been through unjust and illegal roundups before, so they offered little resistance. They knew the jails were not celled enough for all of them, so if it meant a few days' incarceration, what did it matter? There was, however, a second group of criminals, those who realized that capture meant, for various past performances, death, and these, without exception, resisted. In general, Yellen, through adroit handling of the brute squad, was able to bring these bad fellows eventually under control. Still, 36 hours before the sunset wedding, there were half a dozen holdouts left in the thieves' quarter. Yellen arose at dawn, and, tired and confused, not one of the captured criminals seemed to come from Gilder. He gathered the best of the brute squad and led them into the thieves' quarter for what simply had to be the final foray. Yellen went immediately to Falkbrig's alehouse, first sending all save 2 brutes off on various tasks, keeping a noisy one and a quiet one for his own needs. He knocked on Falkbridge's door and waited. Falkbridge was, by far, the most powerful man in the thieves' quarter. He seemed almost to own half of it, and there wasn't a crime of any dimension he wasn't behind. He always avoided arrest, and everyone except Yellen thought Falkbridge must be bribing somebody. Yellen knew he was bribing somebody, since every month, rain or shine, Falkbridge came to Yellen's house and gave him a satchel full of money. "Who?" Falkbridge called from inside the alehouse. "The chief of all enforcement in Florence City, accompanied by brutes," Yellen replied. Completeness was one of his virtues. "Oh!" Falkbridge opened the door. For a power, he was very unimposing, short and chubby. "Come in!" Yellen entered, leaving the 2 brutes in the doorway. Get ready and be quick," Yellen said. "Hey, Yellen, it's me," Falkbridge said softly. I know, Yellen said softly right back. "But please do me a favor, get ready." "Pretend I did. I'll stay in the alehouse, I promise. I got enough food, no one will ever know." "The prince is without mercy," Yellen said. "If I let you stay and I'm found out, that's it for me." "I've been paying you 20 years to stay out of jail. You're a rich man just so I don't have to go to jail. Where's the logic of me paying you and no advantages?" "I'll make it up to you. I'll get you the best cell in Florence City. Do you trust me?" "How can I trust a man I pay 20 years to stay out of jail, when all of a sudden, the minute a little extra pressure's on, he says, 'Go to jail'? I'm not going." "You!" Yellen signaled to the noisy one. The brute started running forward. "Put this man in the wagon immediately," Yellen said. Falkbridge was starting to explain when the noisy one clubbed him across the neck. "Not so hard!" Yellen cried. The noisy one picked up Falkbridge, tried dusting his clothes. "Is he alive?" Yellen asked. "See, I didn't know you wanted him breathing in the wagon. I thought you only wanted him in the wagon, breathing or not, so—" "Enough!" Yellen interrupted, and upset he hurried out of the alehouse while the noisy one brought Falkbridge. "Is that everyone, then?" Yellen asked, as various brutes were visible, leaving the thieves' quarter, pulling various wagons. "I think there's still the fencer with the brandy," the noisy one began. "See, they tried getting him out yesterday, but I can't be bothered with a drunk. I'm an important man. Just get him out of here and do it. Both of you, take the wagon with you and be quick. This quarter must be locked and deserted by sundown, or the prince will be mad at me, and I don't like it much when the prince is mad at me." We're going, the noisy one replied, and he hurried off, letting the quiet one bring the wagon with Falkbridge inside. They tried getting this fencer yesterday, some of the standard enforcers, but it seems he has certain sword skills that made him wary. But I think I have a trick that will work. The quiet one hurried along behind the corner, and from around another corner just up ahead, a kind of drunken mumbling was starting to get louder. I'm getting very bored, Vizzini, came from out of sight. 3 months is a long time to wait, especially for a passionate Spaniard. Much louder now. And I am very passionate, Vizzini, and you are nothing but a tardy Sicilian. So if you are not here in 90 more days, I'm done with you, you hear me? Done. Much softer now. I didn't mean it, Vizzini. I just love my filthy stoop. Take your time. The noisy brute slowed. That kind of talk goes on all day. Ignore it and keep the wagon out of sight. The quiet one pushed the wagon almost to the corner and stopped it. Stay with the wagon, the noisy one added, and then whispered, Here comes my trick. With that, he walked alone around the corner and stared ahead at the skinny fellow sitting clutching the brandy bottle on the stoop. Ho there, friend, the noisy one said. I'm not moving. Keep your ho there, said the brandy drinker. Hear me through, please. I have been sent by Prince Humperdinck himself, who is in need of entertainment. Tomorrow is our country's 500th anniversary, and the dozen greatest tumblers and fencers and entertainers are at this very moment competing. The finest pair will compete. Lost my place. The finest pair will compete personally tomorrow for the new bride and groom. Now, as to why I'm here, yesterday some of my friends tried rousting you, and they said later that you resisted with some splendid sword work. So if you would like, I, at great personal sacrifice, will rush you to the fencing contest, where, if you are as good as I am told, you might have yet the honor of entertaining the royal couple tomorrow. Do you think you could win such a competition? Breezing! Then hurry while there's still time to enter. The Spaniard managed to stand. He unsheathed his sword and flashed it a few times across the morning. The noisy one took a few quick steps backward and said, No time to waste. Come along now. Then the drunk started yelling, I'm waiting for Vizzini. Meanie. I'm not mean. I'm just following the rule. Cruel. Not cruel, not mean. Can you understand? And here his voice trailed off for a moment, and he squinted. Then, quietly, he said, Fezzik? From behind the noisy one, the quiet one said, Who says it? Inigo took a step from his stoop, trying desperately to make his eyes focus through the brandy. Sezzik? Is that a joke you made? The quiet one said, Played? Inigo gave a cry and started staggering forward. Fezzik, it's you! True! And he reached out, grabbed Inigo just before he stumbled, brought him back in an upright position. Hold him just like that, the noisy brute said, and he moved in quickly, right arm raised, as he had done to Falkbridge. Splat! Fezzik dumped the noisy brute into the wagon beside Falkbridge, covered them both with a soiled blanket, then hurried back to Inigo, whom he had left leaning propped against a building. It's just so good to see you, Fezzik said then. Oh, it is, but... Inigo's voice was winding steadily down now. I'm too weak for surprises, were the last sounds he got out before he fainted from fatigue and brandy and no food and bad sleep and lots of other things, none of them nutritious. Fezzik hoisted him up with one arm, took the wagon in the other, and hurried back to Falkbridge's house. He carried Inigo inside, placed him upstairs on Falkbridge's feather bed, then hurried away to the entrance of the thieves' quarter, dragging the wagon behind him. He made very sure that the dirty blanket covered both the victims, and outside the entrance the brute squad held a boot count of those they had removed. The total came out right, and by 11 in the morning the great walled thieves' quarter was officially empty and padlocked. Released from activity, Fezzik followed the wall around to a quiet place and waited. He was alone. Walls were never any problem for him. Creepy. Walls were never any problem for him, not so long as his arms worked, and he quickly scaled this one and hurried back through the quiet streets to Falkbridge's house. He made some tea, carried it upstairs, force-fed Inigo, Within a few moments, Inigo was blinking under his own power. "It's just so good to see you," Fezzik said then. "Oh, it is, Inigo agreed. "And I'm sorry for fainting, but I had done nothing for 90 days but wait for Vizzini and drink brandy, and a little surprise like seeing you. Well, that was just too much for me on an empty stomach, but I'm fine now." "Good," Fezzik said. "Vizzini is dead." "He is, dead, you say? And then he fainted again. Fezzik began berating himself. "Oh, you stupid, if there's a right way and a wrong way, trust you to find the dumb way. Fool, fool, back to the beginning was the rule." Fezzik really felt idiotic then, because after months of forgetting, now that he didn't need to remember any more, he remembered. He hurried downstairs and made some tea and brought some crackers and honey and fed Inigo again. When Inigo blinked, Fezzik said, "Rest." "Thank you, my friend. No more fainting." And he closed his eyes and slept for an hour. Fezzik busied himself in Falkbridge's kitchen. He really didn't know how to prepare a proper meal, but he could heat and he could cool and he could sniff the good meat from the rotted, so it wasn't too great a task to finally end up with something that once looked like roast beef and another thing that could have been a potato. The unexpected smell of hot food brought Inigo around, and he lay in bed, eating every bite Fezzik fed him. "I never realized I was in such terrible condition," Inigo said, chewing away. "Shh, you'll be fine now," Fezzik said, cutting another piece of meat, putting it into Inigo's mouth. Inigo chewed it carefully down. "First you appearing on so suddenly, and then on top of that the business of Vizzini. It was too much for me." "It would have been too much for anybody. Just rest." Fezzik began to cut another piece of meat. "I felt such a baby, so helpless," Inigo said, taking the next bite, chewing away. "You'll be as strong as ever by sundown," Fezzik promised, getting the next piece of meat ready. "The six-fingered man is named Count Rugen, and he's here right now in Florin City." "Interesting," Inigo managed this time before he fainted again. Fezzik stood over the still figure. "Well, it is so good to see you." Lost my place. He said,
so good
"It
to
is
see you."
really
Sorry,
okay. It is so
you
good.
lost your place.
Yeah, but saying the words doesn't help me. "It is so good to see you," he said, "and it's been such a long time, and I've just got so much news." Inigo only lay there. Fezzik hurried to Falkbridge's tub and plugged it up, and after a lot of work, he got it filled with steaming water, and then he dunked Inigo in, holding him down with one hand, holding Inigo's mouth shut with the other. And when the brandy began to sweat from the Spaniard's body, Fezzik emptied the tub and filled it again with icy water this time, and back he plunged Inigo, and when the water began to warm a bit back, he filled the tub with steaming stuff, and back went Inigo, and now the brandy was really oozing from his pores, and that was how it went, hour after hour, hot to icy cold to steaming hot, and then some tea, and then some toast, and then some steaming hot water again, and more icy cold, and then a nap, and then more toast and less tea, but the longest steamer yet, and this time there wasn't much brandy left inside, and one final icy cold, and then a 2-hour sleep until by mid-afternoon they sat downstairs in Falkbridge's kitchen, and now, at last, for the first time in 90 days, Inigo's eyes were almost bright. His hands did shake, but not all that noticeably, and perhaps the Inigo of before the brandy would have bested this fellow now in 60 minutes of solid fencing, but not too many other masters in the world would have survived for 5. "Tell me briefly now why I've been here with the brandy. You have been where?" "Well, I spent some time in a fishing village, and then I wandered a bit, and then a few weeks ago I found myself in Gilder, and the talk there was of the coming wedding, and perhaps a coming war, and I remembered Buttercup when I carried her up the cliffs of insanity, and she was so pretty and soft, and I had never been so near perfume before, that I thought it might be nice to see her wedding celebrations. So I came here, but my money was gone, and they were forming a brute squad and needed giants, and I went to apply, and they beat me with clubs to see if I was strong enough, and when the clubs broke, they decided I was. I've been a brute first class all this past week. It's very good pay." Inigo nodded. "All right, again, and this time, please, be brief. From the beginning, the man in black, did he get by you?" "Yes, fairly, too. Strength against strength. I was too slow and out of practice." "Then it was he that killed Vizzini." "That is my belief." "Did he use his sword or his strength?" Fezzik tried to remember. There weren't any sword wounds, and Vizzini didn't seem broken. There were just these 2 goblets, and Vizzini was dead. Poison is my guess. Why would Vizzini take poison? Fezzik hadn't the least idea, but he was definitely dead. Fezzik was positive. Inigo began to pace the kitchen, his movements quick and sharp, the way his movements were before. "All right, Vizzini is dead. Enough of that. Tell me briefly where the 6-fingered Rugen is, so that I may kill him." "That may not be so easy, Inigo, because the Count is with the Prince, and the Prince is in the castle, and he has pledged not to leave it until after the wedding, for he fears another sneak attack from Gilder, and all the entrances but the main one are sealed for safety, and the main doors are guarded by 20 men. Inigo said, pacing faster now. "If you fought 5, and I fenced 5, that would mean 10 gone, which would be bad because that would also mean 10 left, and they would probably kill us. But," and now he picked up his pace even more, "if you should take 6 and I took 8, that would mean 14 beaten, which would not be as bad, but still bad enough, since the 6 remaining would kill us." And now he whirled on Fezzik. "How many could you handle at most?" "Well, some of them are from the brute squad, so I don't think more than 8. Leaving me 12, which is not impossible, but not the best way to spend your first evening after 3 months on brandy." And suddenly Inigo's body sagged, and his eyes, bright a moment ago, now there was moisture. "What has happened?" Fezzik cried. "Oh, my friend, I need Vizzini. I'm not a planner. I follow. Tell me what to do, and no man alive does it better. But my mind is like fine wine. It travels badly. I go from thought to thought, but not with logic, and I forget things. And help me, Fezzik. What am I to do?" Fezzik wanted to cry now, too. "I am the stupidest fellow that was ever born." You have a comment?
No.
Okay. "I am the stupidest fellow that was ever born. You know that. I couldn't remember to come back here, even after you made up that special lovely rhyme for me. I need Vizzini, but Vizzini is dead!" And then Inigo was up again, blazing about the kitchen, and for the first time his fingers were snapping with excitement. "I don't need Vizzini. I need his master. I need the man in black. Look, he bested me with steel, my greatness. He bested you with strength, yours. He must have outplanned and outthought Vizzini, and he will tell me how to break through the castle and kill the 6-fingered beast. If you have the least notion where the man in black is at this moment, relate quickly the answer." "He sails the 7 seas with the dread pirate Roberts." "Why would he do a thing like that?" "Because he's a sailor for the dread pirate Roberts." "A sailor? A common sailor? A common, ordinary seaman bests the great Inigo Montoya with the sword. Inconceivable! He must be the dread pirate Roberts, otherwise it makes no sense. In any event, he is sailing far away. Count Rugen says so, and the prince himself gave the order. The prince wants no pirates around, what with all the trouble he is having with Gilder. Remember, they kidnapped the princess once. They might try... Fezzik, we kidnapped the princess once. You never were strong on memory, but even you should recall that we put the Gilder uniform pieces under the princess' saddle. Vizzini did that because he was under orders to do it. Someone wanted Gilder to look guilty, and who but a noble would want that, and what noble more than the war-loving prince himself? We never knew who hired Vizzini. I guess Humperdinck. And As for the Count's word on the man in black's whereabouts, since the Count is the same man who slaughtered my father, we can rest assured that he is certainly a terrific fellow." He started for the door. "Come, we have much to do." Fezzik followed him through the darkening streets of the thieves' quarter. "You'll explain things to me as we go along," Fezzik said. "I'll explain them to you now." His blade-like body knifed on through the quiet streets. Fezzik hurrying alongside. "A. I need to reach Count Rugen to at last avenge my father. B. I cannot plan on how to reach Count Rugen. C. Vizzini could have planned it for me, but C'. Vizzini is unavailable. However, D. The man in black outplanned Vizzini, so therefore E. The man in black can get me to Count Rugen. But I told you Prince Humperdinck, after he captured him, gave orders for all to hear that the man in black was to be returned safely to his ship. Everyone in Florin knows this to be so. A. Prince Humperdinck had some plans to kill his fiancée and hired us to carry them out, but B. The man in black ruined Prince Humperdinck's plans. However, eventually, C. Prince Humperdinck managed to capture the man in black. And as everybody in all Florin also knows, Prince Humperdinck has a terrible temper. So therefore, D. If a man has a terrible temper, what could be more fun than losing it against the very fellow who spoiled your plans to kill your fiancée? They had reached the thieves' quarter wall now. Inigo jumped on Fezzik's shoulder, and Fezzik started to climb. Conclusion 1, Inigo continued, not missing a beat. Since the prince is in Florin City taking out his temper on the man in black, the man in black must also be in Florin City. Conclusion 2, the man in black must not be too happy with his present situation. And conclusion 3, I am in Florin City and need a planner to avenge my father, while he is in Florin City and needs a rescuer to salvage his future. And when people have equal needs of each other, conclusion 4 and final, deals are made. Not duels, but deals. Fezzik reached the top of the wall and started carefully climbing down the other side. "I understand everything," he said. "You understand nothing. But it really doesn't matter, since what you mean is, you're glad to see me, just as I'm glad to see you, because no more loneliness." "That's what I mean," said Fezzik. It was dusk when they began their search blindly through all Florin City, dusk a day before the wedding. Count Rugen was about to begin his nightly experiments at that dusk, gathering up his notebooks from the room filled with all his jottings. 5 levels underground behind castle walls, locked and chained and silent, Wesley waited beside the machine. In a way, he still looked like Wesley, except, of course, that he had been broken. 20 years of his life had been sucked away. 20 were left. Pain was anticipation. Soon the Count would come again. Against any wishes he had left, Wesley went on crying. It was dusk when Buttercup went to see the prince. She knocked loudly, waited, knocked again. She could hear him shouting inside, and if it had not been so important, she would never have knocked the 3rd time, but she did, and the door was yanked open, and the look of anger on his the look of anger on his face immediately changed to the sweetest smile. "Beloved," he said, "come in. A moment more is all I need." And he turned back to Yellen. "Look at her, Yellen, my bride-to-be. Has any man ever been so blessed?" Yellen shook his head. "Am I wrong, do you think, to go to any lengths, then, to protect her?" Yellen shook his head again. The prince was driving him crazy with his stories of the Gilder infiltration. Yellen had every spy he'd ever used working day and night, and not one of them had come up with anything about Gilder, and yet the prince insisted. Inwardly, Yellen sighed. It was beyond him. He was simply an enforcer, not a prince. In fact, the only remotely disturbing news he'd heard since he'd closed the thieves' quarter that morning was within the hour, when someone told him of a rumor that the ship of the dread pirate Roberts had perhaps been seen sailing all the way into Florin Channel itself. But such a thing, Yellen knew from long experience, was Simply rumor. I'll tell you, they are everywhere, these guilders, the prince went on, and since you seem unable to stop them, I wish to change some plans. All the gates have been sealed to my castle, except the front one, yes? Yes, and 20 men guard it. Add 80 more. I want 100 men, clear? 100 men it will be, every brute available. Inside the castle I'm quite safe. I have my own supplies, food, stables enough. As long as they cannot get at me, I will survive. These, then, are the new and final plans. Jot them down. All 500th anniversary arrangements are cancelled until after the wedding. The wedding is tomorrow at sunset. My bride and I will ride my whites to Florin Channel, surrounded by all your enforcers. There we will board a ship and begin our long-awaited honeymoon, surrounded by every ship in the Florin Armada. Every ship but 4, Buttercup corrected. He blinked at her a moment in silence. Then he said, blowing her a kiss, but discreetly so Yellen couldn't see, Yes, how forgetful I am. Every ship but 4. He turned back to Yellen, but in his blink, in that following sentence, Buttercup had seen it all. Those ships will stay with us until I deem it safe to release them. Of course, Gilder could attack them, but that is a chance we must risk. Let me think if there is anything else. The prince loved giving orders, especially the kind he knew would never need carrying out. Also, Yellen was a slow jotter, and that only added to the fun. Excused, the prince said finally. With a bow, Yellen was gone. The 4 ships were never sent, Buttercup said when they were alone. Don't bother lying to me any more. Whatever was done for your own good, sweet pudding. Somehow I do not think so. You're nervous. I'm nervous. We're getting married tomorrow. We've got a right to be. You couldn't be more wrong. You know, I'm very calm. And in truth, she did seem that way. It doesn't matter whether you sent the ships or not. Wesley will come for me. There is a God, I know that, and there is love, I know that too. So Wesley will save me. You're a silly girl. Now go to your room. Yes, I am a silly girl, and yes again, I will go to my room. And you are a coward with a heart filled with nothing but fear. The prince had to laugh. The greatest hunter in the world, and you say I'm a coward? I do indeed. I'm getting much smarter as I age. I say you are a coward, and you are. I think you hunt only to reassure yourself that you are not what you are, the weakest thing to ever walk the earth. He will come for me, and then we will be gone, and you will be helpless for all your hunting, because Wesley and I are joined by the bond of love, and you cannot track that, not with 1,000 bloodhounds, and you cannot break it, not with 1,000 swords. Humperdinck screamed toward her then, rippling at her autumn hair, yanking her from her feet and down the long curving corridor to her room, where he tore that door open and threw her inside and locked her there and started running for the underground entrance to the Zoo of Death. We're in italics now. My father stopped reading. Go on, I said. Lost my place, he said, and I waited there, still weak with pneumonia and wet with fear, until he started reading again. Inigo allowed Fezzik to open the door. Hey, I said. Hold it, that's not right. You skipped. And then I quick caught my tongue, because we'd just had that scene when I got all upset about Buttercup marrying Humperdinck when I'd accused him of skipping, and I didn't want any repeat of that. Daddy, I said, I don't mean anything, but wasn't the prince sort of running toward the zoo, and then the next thing you said was about Inigo, and maybe I mean, shouldn't there be a page or like that in between? My father started to close the book. I'm not fighting. Please, don't close it. It's not for that, he said, and then he looked at me for a long time. Billy, he said. He almost never called me that. I loved it when he did. Anybody else, I hated it. But when the barber did it, I don't know, I just melted. Billy, do you trust me? What is that? Of course I do. Billy, you got pneumonia. You're taking this book very serious. I know, because we already fought once about it. I'm not fighting anymore. Listen to me. I never lied to you yet, did I? Okay, trust me. I don't want to read you the rest of this chapter, and I want you to say it's all right. Why? What happens in the rest of this chapter? If I tell you, I could accomplish the same by reading. Just say okay. I can't say that until I know what happens. But tell me what happens, and I'll tell you if it's okay. And I promise, if I don't want to hear it, you can skip on to Inigo. You won't do me this favor? I'll smack you out of bed when you're asleep. I don't care where you hide the book. I'll find it, and I'll read the rest of the chapter myself. So you might as well just tell me. Billy, please. I gotcha. You might as well admit it. My father sighed this terrible sound. I knew I'd had him beaten then. Wesley dies, my father said. I said, what do you mean, Wesley dies? You mean dies? My father nodded. Prince Humperdinck kills him? Prince Humperdinck kills him. He's only faking, though, right? My father shook his head, closed the book all the way. "Oh, no," I said, and I started to cry. "I'm sorry," my father said. "I'll leave you alone," and he left me. "Who gets Humperdinck?" I screamed after him. He stopped in the hall. "I don't understand." "Who kills Prince Humperdinck? At the end, somebody's got to get him. Is it Fezzik? Who?" "Nobody kills him. He lives." "You mean he wins, Daddy? Why are you reading me this thing?" And I buried my head in my pillow, and I never cried like that again, not once to this day. I could feel almost my heart emptying into my pillow. I guess the most amazing thing about crying, though, is that when you're in it, you think it'll go on forever, but it never really lasts half what you think. Not in terms of real time. In terms of real emotions, it's worse than you think, but not by the clock. When my father came back, it couldn't have been even close to an hour later. "So," he said, "shall we go on tonight or not?" "Shoot," I told him, eyes dry, no catch in the throat, nothing. Fire when ready. "When with Inigo?" "Let's hear the murder," I said. I knew I wasn't about to bawl again. Like buttercups, my heart was now a secret garden, and the walls were very high. Humperdinck screamed toward her then, ripping at her autumn hair, yanking her from her feet and down the long curving corridor to her room, where he tore that door open and threw her inside and locked her there, and started running for the underground entrance to the Zoo of Death, and down he plunged, giant stride after giant stride, and when he threw the door of the 5th level cage open, even Count Rugen was startled at the purity of whatever the emotion was that was reflected in the prince's eyes. The prince moved to Wesley. "She loves you," the prince cried. "She loves you, and you love her. So think of that. Think of this, too. In all the world, you might have been happy, genuinely happy. Not one couple in a century has that chance. Not really, no matter what the storybooks say. But you could have had it. And so I would think no one will ever suffer a loss as great as you." And with that, he grabbed the dial and pushed it all the way forward. And the Count cried, "Not to 20!" But by then it was too late. The death scream had started. It was much worse than the scream of the wild dog. In the first place, the dial for the wild dog had only been set to 6, whereas this was more than triple that. And so, naturally enough, it was more than 3 times as long, and more than 3 times as loud. But none of this really was why it was worse. It was the scream from a human throat that made the difference. In her chamber, Buttercup heard it, and it frightened her, but she had not the least idea what it was. By the main door of the castle, Yellen heard it, and it also frightened him, though he couldn't imagine what it was either. All the 100 brutes and fighters flanked by the main door heard it too, and to a man they were bothered by it, and they talked it over for quite a while, but none of them had any sound notions as to what it might have been. The great square was filled with common people, excited about the coming wedding and anniversary, and they all heard it too, and no one even made the pretense of not being scared, but again, none of them knew at all what it might have been. The death scream rose higher in the night. All the streets leading into the square were also filled with citizens, all trying to crowd into the square, and they heard it. But once they admitted they were petrified, they gave up trying to guess what it might have been. Inigo knew immediately. In the tiny alley that he and Fezzik were trying to force their way through, he stopped, remembering. The alley led to the streets that led to the square, and the alley was jammed too. "I don't like that sound," Fezzik said, his skin for the moment cold. Inigo grabbed the giant, and the words began pouring out. "Fezzik, Fezzik, that is the sound of ultimate suffering. I know that sound. That was the sound in my heart when Count Rugen slaughtered my father, and I saw him fall. The man in black makes it now." "You think that's him? Who else has the cause for ultimate suffering this celebration night?" And with that he started to follow the sound. But the crowds were in his way, and he was strong, but he was thin, and he cried, "Fezzik, Fezzik, we must track that sound. We must trace it to its source, and I cannot move, so you must lead me. Fly, Fezzik. This is Inigo begging you. Make a path, please." Well, Fezzik had rarely had anyone beg him for anything, least of all Inigo, and when something like that happened, you did what you could. So Fezzik, without waiting, began to push forward. Lots of people. Fezzik pushed harder. Lots of people began to move out of Fezzik's way fast. The death scream was starting to fade now, fading in the clouds. "Fezzik!" said Inigo. "All your power now!" Down the alley Fezzik ran, people screaming and diving to get out of his way, and in his footsteps Inigo kept pace, and at the end of the alley was a street, and the scream was fainter now, but Fezzik turned left, and into the middle of the street he went, and he owned it. No one was in his way, nothing dared block his way, and the scream was getting just so hard to hear. So with all his might, Fezzik roared, "Quiet!" And the street suddenly hushed, and Fezzik pounded along, Inigo right behind, and the scream was still there, still faintly there, and into the great square itself and the castle beyond before the scream was gone. Wesley lay dead by the machine. The prince kept the dial by the 20 mark, long after it was necessary, until the count said, "Done." The prince left without another look at Wesley. He took the secret underground stairs, 4 at a time. "She actually called me a coward," he said, and then he was gone from sight. Count Rugen started taking notes. Then he threw his quill pen down. He tested Wesley briefly. Then he shook his head. Death was not of any intellectual interest to him at all. When you were dead, you couldn't react to pain. The count said, "Dispose of the body," because even though he couldn't see the albino, he knew the albino was there. It was really a shame, he realized as he mounted the stairs after the prince. You just didn't come across victims like Wesley every day of the year. When they were gone, the albino came out, pulled the cups from the corpse, decided to burn the body on the garbage pyre back behind the castle, which meant a wheelbarrow. He hurried up the underground stairs, came out the second entrance, moved quickly to the main tool shed. All the wheelbarrows were buried back at the rear wall, behind the hoes and rakes and hedge trimmers. The albino made a hissing sound of displeasure and began to pick his way past all the other equipment. This kind of thing always seemed to happen to him when he was in a hurry. The albino hissed again, extra work all the time. Wouldn't you just know it? He finally got the barrow out and was just passing the false and deadly supposed main entrance to the zoo when "I'm having the devil's own trouble tracking that scream" was spoken to him, and the albino whirled to find there in the castle grounds a blade thin stranger with a sword in his hand. The sword suddenly flicked its way to the albino's throat. "Where is the man in black?" the swordsman said just then. He had a giant scar slanting down each cheek and seemed like no one to trifle with. Whispered, "I know no man in black." "Did the scream come from that place?" The fellow indicated the main entrance. Nod. "And the throat it came from. I need this man, so be quick." Whispered, "Wesley." Inigo reasoned. "A sailor? Brought here by Rugen?" Nod. "And I reach him where?" The albino hesitated, then pointed to the deadly entrance, whispered, "He is on the bottom level, 5 levels down. Then I have no more need of you. Quiet him for a while, Fezzik." From behind him, the albino was aware of a giant shadow moving. Funny, he thought, the last thing he remembered, I thought that was a tree. Inigo was on fire now. There was no stopping him. Fezzik hesitated by the main door. Why would he tell the truth? He's a zookeeper threatened with death. Why would he lie? That doesn't follow. I don't care, Inigo said sharply, and in fact he didn't. He knew in his heart the man in black was down there. There was no other reason for Fezzik to find him, for Fezzik to know of Rugen, for everything to be coming together after so many years of waiting. If there was a God, then there was a man in black waiting. Inigo knew that. He knew it. And of course, he was absolutely right. But again, of course, there were many things he did not know. That the man in black was dead, for one. That the entrance they were taking was the wrong one, for another. A false one. Good night. A false one set up to foil those like himself who did not belong. There were spitting cobras down there, though what would actually come at him would be worse. These things he did not know either. But his father had to be revenged, and the man in black would figure out how. That was enough for Inigo. And so, with an urgency that would soon turn to deep regret, he and Fezzik approached the Zoo of Death. And that is where we will leave it today, and tomorrow we will read Chapter 7, The Wedding. Finally, the prince and the bride get married at the glorious wedding. No, we're not reading another chapter today. And the first word is Inigo. So, I hope that you're enjoying the story this evening, and we will catch you all later. While I realize that there's nobody presently on,
Except me.
except for Mom, who's here.
You call him Mama, nobody.
That's not what I said. Not what I said. While there is no one presently on from outside of our house, I do realize that there are people that will be watching this later on. So I will wish those people and all of my children adieu. Have a good night. God bless you. And we will see you again.